Hello and welcome to the weekly wrap for November 20th, 2020. My name's Marianne Simpson from Apex Media.
And I'm Seth Miller from PaxX.aero.
Seth, we've got loads of great news this week. Actually, it was a week with a lot of big headlines, but I think probably the most exciting of all is news that the FAA has basically approved the ungrounding of the 737 MAX.
Absolutely. Huge story coming out of the FAA this week. On November 18th, on Wednesday, they rescinded the grounding order and the airworthiness directives that required changes to the MCAS system, changes to some wiring situations, the requirements for new training as suggested by the JBOE, includes now simulator training for all the pilots. A lot of these things finally took effect, and technically it's legal to fly it. No one's actually doing that yet, but they can. There's a lot of challenges and sort of runway still ahead to get it back into service, but this is big news.
Yeah, it's been 20 months that the aircraft has been grounded, and we have a lot of other aircraft are grounded now as well, but I'm sure that everybody who operates the Boeing 737 and Boeing themselves are incredibly happy about this. So like you said, the enhanced MCAS system changes are a major part of what Boeing has been working on in terms of basically making the aircraft safer to fly again. And they've released a little video about that, so we'll watch that now.
The flight control software will now compare inputs from two sensors before activating MCAS, rather than activating on a single sensor. If there is a disagreement between the sensors, MCAS will not activate. If both sensors agree and MCAS is activated, it will only activate once, and pilots can override it without the software activating automatically again. And it will never override the pilot's ability to control the airplane by simply pulling back on the control column. More than 4,400 hours of testing included more than 1,350 flights.
And while it is coming back into service and a lot of people are happy about it, there are still some concerns out there. Senators Richard Blumenthal from Connecticut and Ed Markey from Massachusetts issued a statement saying that allowing these planes to fly again is a premature leap of faith, and suggested that the FAA's directive to unground the 737 MAX aircraft fails to address the larger systemic issues at Boeing and the FAA that led to the deaths of the 346 people in the two crashes. And there's something to be said there. Certainly there's a bill stalled that would alter the way that the agency has oversight and how it handles some of the certification situations. So definitely an interesting point there. There's also some pushback from the survivors of the victims of the crashes, suggesting that Boeing hasn't finalized the compensation fund that it had promised them. So a lot going on here, a lot of moving pieces, and we still have to deal with the fact that most of the foreign certification agencies, whether it's Canada, the UK, the rest of EASA in Europe, Australia, China, also have not certified it for return to service. Brazil too. So right now it's only a U.S. situation, but those will come along in due time. There's a lot going on, a lot to unpack here.
In terms of things that are going on, something that happened last week, Seth, was the FlightPlan, the second iteration of FlightPlan broadcast produced by Inmarsat in partnership with Apex.
Yeah, it was a lot of fun. I got to participate in it, as did you. I had a couple segments on there. I spoke with our good friend John Walton about sort of where we are and what the future holds for the passenger experience, and I think that was super interesting. Talked a little bit about loyalty programs as well and how they're sort of funding a lot of the major airlines right now, whether through straight revenue or being something good to borrow money against, but how that also poses some challenges for them. So a lot going on there, but you had a great interview I enjoyed, actually.
Yeah, I did. I did a few interviews. Some of them were pre-recorded. Some of them were live as part of the event. So one of the interviews that I did live as part of the event was with Carey, who is the easyJet's Chief Commercial and Customer Officer. So I actually did two interviews with Robert. They were both great and both a little bit different. One of them we did as a pre-record before the event just in the event that he got pulled away at the last minute and couldn't make it to the live interview. But it turned out that he could make the live interview, so we did too. So the one we're going to show you now is really cool. He kind of talks a little bit about the rocky restart to operations over the past summer, how they saw really great capacity, but then, restrictions and quarantines and all these things started coming back in. So he talks a little bit about how the airline has learned to be more agile, and also what they've learned about different segments of passengers and what makes each of them is motivating each of those different sort of groups to fly or not fly at this time. So without any further ado, we'll show you that clip now. Okay, so what are some of the most important things you think we've learned as an industry since the pandemic began? And for easyJet in particular, how steep has the learning curve been?
I mean, it's been baptism by fire, you'd probably say. The good thing I think you'd say coming out of it is we've done things faster and things that we never thought we'd get done before. We put in voucher solutions that initially we thought were going to take us 18 months. When we looked at them in the past, we did it in 10 days. We've now taken our whole schedule building process and moved it from, where we were doing pretty much 2 builds per year. We've now taken it and we can do a schedule in roughly 2 weeks. We're getting flying up and down literally week by week as regulations change. And I think, there's a lot of learning that goes on in there, and we've had to reset a lot of things, especially if you look at, how consumers are traveling, how we need to price in those markets, what are the behaviors we're seeing, all are changing, and we're learning to adapt fast to those things. But that's absolutely, been the challenge of this whole event is how do we adapt to those things and make sure we can maximize our performance throughout.
So do you think that a low-cost carrier, one that has never really adhered too much to the traditional business model tradition, is better positioned to do something like this than, say, a legacy carrier?
I work for a low-cost carrier, so I'm absolutely going to say yes on this one. I think we have strengths in our model which allow us to do that, which is, the way we've constructed our network, which was built around base airports, gives us a lot of flexibility of what we can ramp up and ramp down in a base, what we want to change. If we want to change a destination mix of what we're doing, we can do that fairly easily out of a base and with fairly quick cycle times, especially this summer. We went this summer, we saw, as an example, we saw a demand spike on French domestic flying. And literally within the space of 2 weeks, we shifted some of our capacity out of Orly to increase to Nice and managed to get some of that demand. And I think those are the kind of reactions we can do very quickly that are very easy in our network.
Let's go back to the alignment with the government question right now for a moment. Do you think that governments, across the world have supported airlines and the broader commercial aviation industry in the way that they should have, or do you think more could have been done?
When you say governments like that, it sounds like one giant entity, and I think you've seen a lot of variation between different governments around the world, and I think you've seen both positives and negatives in that you see some governments that are coming in probably with maybe too much support for certain airlines that probably should, let's be blunt, probably didn't have much of a strategic future going into COVID, and then you have airlines that are, governments that are probably doing much less for aviation, and you've got everything in between. I think, from our perspective, what's really key at this point is, especially as we're continuing to see the effect and we're continuing to be impacted by, new shutdowns and new restrictions being placed in, it's really hard to manage through all that. And so there is a need for some support, but we think that support should be equally placed among carriers and not favored to certain carriers over others. And then likewise, I think even as important is that we're all starting to get aligned around, how can we introduce testing regimes that actually are going to be, not expensive, that are going to be fast and easy for the customer? How do we have regulations in place that they can, actually plan around? A number of our customers, we know they want to plan to fly at Christmas. We know they want to plan, which is only 6 weeks away at this point. And they don't even have certainty to be able to book there. And that's where if we can get governments acting in a much more coordinated, predictable fashion, you can see the effect. When we had predictable restrictions over the summer, you saw people come out and travel. And I think that will be there if we can get there.
So we talked a bit about barriers to travel, one of them being that we don't know what the restrictions are going to be. They're constantly changing. So between that, concerns over catching the virus, or even quarantine changing restrictions on either end, what do you think is the biggest holdback right now for people to stop them from traveling by air?
It's actually it's a super fascinating thing if you look into it. When we looked at our customer base, right, you kind of have two customer sets out there. You've got call it broadly half the customer base who are ready to travel right now, and they're just looking for consistency in the restrictions and the regulations they're going to have to deal with, and so that they can plan accordingly. And those customers are the ones who traveled last summer, and they actually fueled a lot of that demand, and they're ready to get back traveling again. We can see it. They're already looking ahead towards bookings for next summer, et cetera. There's a second group of travelers which are basically saying, I want to see a vaccine, or I want to see some kind of, a test regime that I can have some more confidence when I'm booking that I'm not going to be subject to corona when I travel. And I think those customers, really what it comes down to is, again, vaccine would probably be what their dream state would be. But I think even with a testing regime that they can have comfort in, and to know that I'm getting on a plane, everybody's kind of subject to the same level of scrutiny getting into that plane. I'm going to a place that's going to be relatively safe, and I can have confidence in that. Again, that segment also can get reassured there, and that's if you have some consistency around that, to come back to it, I think that's probably the key thing where customers can have some confidence that it's not only going to be I'm not going to be faced with unknown restrictions, but also that it's a safe environment that I'm going to be flying in when I operate or when I go to travel.
Super interesting stuff. I really, really appreciate that insight. Just really always exciting to learn that sort of how people are seeing it from the inside there. So that's great. Across the channel, over on the continent, we've got some interesting news from Star Alliance and specifically from Lufthansa, bringing biometrics to the forefront. Star Alliance had talked for probably more than a year now about sort of building out this sort of digital biometrics hub that all of their partner airlines could participate in. And Lufthansa and Swiss are going to be the launch partners with some services out of Frankfurt and Munich.
Yeah, I think Munich Airport in particular has always been quite forward-thinking and leading the way in terms of passenger flow and technology and things like that. So it's really exciting to see this being implemented. I know there's loads of other people in the industry as well working on, seamless, totally touchless travel solutions. But what's really cool about this one, and we talked about this in some past episodes, is that this biometric system can read a person's face and match it to their travel documents without them removing their mask.
Yeah, that is a super cool feature of it. It's also one of the things I really like is it's sort of a enroll once, use anywhere. And so as part of the process, you do sort of scan yourself, you take the selfie, you scan your passport, all those things. But then you pick which airlines or airports are allowed to access that data. And, maybe you trust one Star Alliance partner more than the other. If you don't trust the other one or you don't trust the airport or anything like that, you don't have to give them access to that data, and you use your sort of normal process of showing up and talking to an agent instead. So it's a really interesting model, and I think it's going to be great to see how it plays out. But I think it's a great sort of template for how this could work in the future on a broader scale. Down into Africa, Uganda Airlines took delivery of an A330-800. It's the airline's first wide-body aircraft. They're only the second A330-800 customer, which is also interesting news. And gotta say, the interior looks pretty swanky. I use that word a lot, but I still like it. They released some pictures of the economy and business class cabins. IFE screens available, lie flat beds. It's the Stelia Opal product. Up in business class, the cream and brown and gray and blue accents on the color palette all really works together. The mood lighting system comes together. It's that sort of airspace concept from Airbus, and I really think it's a solid offer.
Yeah, one of the articles about this cabin unveiling included a little bit of information that in-flight entertainment will be provided by In-Flight Dublin. Which I didn't know, but they are the largest content service provider in Africa. So that's kind of cool. And Uganda Airlines has revealed some of the starting destinations for the A330neo. They'll be focusing initially on London, Dubai, and Guangzhou, which is kind of an interesting thing as well, because apparently there is not another Ugandan carrier that has done any flights outside of Africa for the last 18 years. So, this is, I think, setting a lot of milestones for them.
Yeah, and look for the inaugural flight up to London early next year. It's going to be exciting. In-flight connectivity news, always my favorite section of this show when we get to do it. This week, Gogo and Intelsat announced that they actually expect their transaction for selling the commercial aviation business to close a couple months early. They've gotten government approvals way faster than initially forecast, and they're looking to get that done in early December rather than sometime in the Q1, Q2 timeframe of 2021. So big news there. Great for Gogo as it tries to refinance its debt. Great for Intelsat as it tries to, actually start running the business and moving forward. That's going to be good for everybody all around.
Yeah, that's really great news. Another little bit of news about Intelsat is that they are actually running a survey right now and inviting members of the industry to respond to it. They've developed a survey in conjunction with the Seamless Airlines, and it's a 15-question survey. It's on SurveyMonkey. I don't have the URL to hand, but we can put that on the screen. So if you're watching this and you are active in the industry and would like to share your thoughts on how things are going right now with IFEC and the return to full service as we look past the current crisis that's going on, you can fill out that survey, and then those results will be made available to everybody. And then, Seth, there's a bit of Viasat news as well on the IFC front.
Absolutely. Viasat and Eutelsat had a joint venture in Europe that was announced in 2016, launched in 2017, and never really did great, to be blunt. And it's over now. Viasat is buying out the remaining share of the KA-SAT satellite that Eutelsat still owned, and will have full control of that satellite and full capacity on that satellite to operate it going forward. They're still going to have some of the legacy Eutelsat customers on there, so obviously they're not going to just kick them off. But it's a good news. It lets Viasat plan for its Viasat 3 deployment that's supposed to launch over Europe in 2022. Eutelsat, for its part, has its Connect and Connect VHTS satellites. Those are the first one's in service now. The next one launches next year. So I think it's, plenty of money moving that will make it an amicable separation. But it's, I think, a very important sort of getting to the next phase of how those companies can operate and get their European policies and programs running right.
Oh, sweet goodbyes. Sweet goodbyes. All right. And the final thought for this show this week is something minty. JetBlue has basically announced a mint product refresh in advance of its first transatlantic flights from the US to London, which are looking to happen in Q3 2021. So they've updated a lot of the soft product, food, things like that in advance of that, and they'll be rolling that out over the next 6 weeks.
Absolutely. I think the foot pocket on the blanket is adorable, and I'm a big fan of that. They've got some new amenity kits, different options depending on eastbound, westbound, morning or night, and even a dedicated set for the Caribbean, so sort of route specific stuff there. It's always been a great product. I've always loved it since I literally was on the first flight, and have loved it since. But yeah, it's a great offering, and it's nice to see it refreshed. And as they said, a tease of what's to come for the London service when that launches next year.
Yeah, it's a very brand partnership driven approach. So on the food side, they're working with a group called the Delicious Hospitality Group, who are behind some really popular New York City restaurants, New York City being, their base city as well. So Charlie Bird, Legacy Records, and Pascal Jones are all really quite popular eateries in the city. So the guys behind that will be working on some tapas style service. Premium headsets are coming from Master and Dynamic, another New York City based brand with a very sort of classic looking aviator style. And then they'll be working with Tuft and Needle on the foot pocket blankets you mentioned and some other sleep things. And then the kits that you did mention are coming from a partnership with somebody called Wander Fuel, which is basically a company that sort of curates wellness bits and bobs, I guess, for people who are traveling. And another partner involved there is Wesco, who are, a longstanding amenity kit partner. And I imagine that they'll be working on the special packaging and logistics behind that amenity kit distribution. So it all looks pretty exciting with a big focus on wellness and sleep and comfort.
Yeah, that's what matters on those longer flights.
Exactly. All right. Well, that's all the time we have for the show this week. Thank you so much, Seth, for being my co-host.
Always a pleasure, Marian.
And thank you, everybody, for watching. Make sure that you like and subscribe. Share the video with your friends. You can visit paxx.aero. That's Seth's website for more aviation news. And be sure to visit apex.aero, which is the site of Apex, for also more aviation news. We'll see you next time.